All right. Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Stress and Anxiety Show. And so on this episode, we're going to talk about some of the common mistakes that people make when it comes to their recovery and some kind of the common pitfalls, if you will, that I see people get caught in and, that I myself got caught in as well. And but before we dive into that, I'd just really appreciate if you could take a moment and show your support for the show by just subscribing and leaving a comment as well. It would just really help us out, or a little review. And with that said, as we jump into this series today, one of the reasons I wanted to create this new series on the common pitfalls is because, I see that a lot of people, they put so much effort into trying to get better, right? And that actually is a common trap that people fall into. And that's actually the first one that I want to talk about this week, right? Is trying harder, right? Is thinking that there's a correlation between the amount of effort you put in and the results you're going to get. And, for our whole lives, we operate like that, right? The harder you work in school, generally speaking, the better grades you get and the better reward you get, right? And so in many ways, most of us have grown up with that mentality of effort equals result, right? And that there's a correlation there. And what we need to realize, especially when it comes to anxiety and OCD, is that it's not about trying harder, right? It's about trying different. It's about going in some ways the complete opposite way that you think you should go. And so many of us, so one of the things that happens, right, is that we get caught in this trap of trying to make a certain thing happen that we can't make happen. So for instance, we try to make thoughts go out of our head, right? We try to not think certain things. We try to, if we feel a feeling that we don't like or that it's uncomfortable, we try to get rid of it, right? And the complete paradox of OCD and anxiety recovery is that the more and more you try to do something, the worse and worse it gets, right? And so let me go ahead and kind of offer an example. So someone who may have a fear around, let's just use an example and talk about someone's faith, right? Well, what happens is someone will get anxious about a topic regarding their faith. Maybe it might be their salvation. Let's just use that. And what happens is the person gets this fear in their mind. Well, what if I lose my salvation? What if I committed the unforgivable sin? What if I go to hell? Some of this kind of what if thought, right? Now, here's what we need to understand. The problem we are addressing is this what if thought here, right? Because what if by its very nature doesn't exist right now. That's why the brain's coming up with it. It's trying to predict a bad outcome and then protect you from it, right? I mean, essentially that's the whole function of that part of your mind, right? It's trying to protect you by coming up with futuristic bad outcomes that we don't want to experience and then prevent those from happening. The problem is that part of our brain can't predict the future, right? So it comes up with all this stuff and then we take it at face value, not considering the idea of all the other things, all the millions of things it never even came up with, right? And also not taking into fact how many times it's come up with something and that thing has never happened, right? But instead, what most of us do is we get caught at, the face value of that thought. So this idea of what if I lose my salvation? Let's just go ahead and talk about that, right? If someone's coming to me and they're, talking about how they've worried about this and they've gone through their initial faith steps, right? They've talked to their spiritual counselor and we've determined that this is now a OCD and anxiety issue. Well, the thing is we have to separate that and we have to treat it like an OCD and anxiety issue, right? It doesn't matter what the person is anxious about. It could be germs, it could be driving, it could be leaving their house, it could be their faith, it could be their sexual orientation, right? The topic of the fear is in many ways irrelevant because we don't want to assume that that's the problem. The problem is that they're trying to get rid of, or there's this huge emotional surge that they're experiencing with this fear. And when that happens, the person gets, ultimately what the person's trying to do is trying to neutralize the emotional experience, right? So they think that because of the content of the thought is what they're afraid of, that if they can figure that out, it will resolve their emotion and they'll be okay. But what we're actually dealing with here is a false alarm that's going off in the body, right? And the more and more we do behaviors that reinforce the idea that that is something we should be concerned about, that's something we should be afraid about, the more and more that alarm's going to go off, right? Which is why we need to understand that when we're dealing with OCD and anxiety, if we're trying to get rid of our thoughts and feelings, it's going to backfire on us. It's going to make us worse. And that's what happens as people start doing compulsions, right? So in this case, let's instance, there'll be a lot of spiritual compulsions like praying or seeking reassurance or reading the same articles again and again and again, right? And then you go into physical things like avoiding, right? So some people might avoid church. Some people might avoid other places. Some people might avoid certain music. And then there's checking and all this stuff that goes on. And all this energy we put into trying to control this instance or control this fear or get rid of these emotions or get rid of these thoughts is actually the very thing that's fueling it, which is what is so paradoxical and what's so hard to get someone to understand. And this is the trap that people get in, is they get in this I'm going to keep putting more and more effort in. And that's the thing, is most people that are really stuck in OCD and anxiety, a lot of times it's actually not a result of a lack of effort. In fact, it's just misplaced effort, you know? And that's one of the things that I see again and again and again. And so the key, you know, when we're talking about these common missteps that people make, is not trying harder, right? It's about taking a step back and saying, look, especially if you've been dealing with this for, you know, a long period of time, you know, in some cases, months, years, I mean, even some cases, decades, right? I mean, there's people out there that I meet all the time, right, that have been wrestling with a certain fear for extended periods of time. And they're so frustrated because they feel like they're trying so hard, and they are in many ways. They're just misplacing the energy into the wrong thing, and it causes feelings of frustration, feelings of hopelessness, right? And that ultimately is what I believe that causes people to even feel things like, you know, not wanting to live anymore or being suicidal. Is because they're working so hard and they're getting worse and worse and worse. And you know, if you can take a step back, if this isn't something you wrestle with, and kind of, you know, just imagine that for a second, it's like, yeah, like it makes sense why people get hopeless, right? And that's where I was, right? Just to be fully transparent, right? You know, many years ago, and the big shift on the journey, and if we can, you know, really avoid this pitfall, or even if you're in this pitfall, to get out of it, is to stop trying harder at the things you know are not working, and shift your perspective, right? And shift the belief structure. And that's a lot of what we talk about over at Restored Minds, right? In our coaching programs, right? Is belief structures, right? And our, you know, understanding this from a completely new lens. You know, and once we're able to understand it there, then we're able to do the correct things. And that involves, you know, obviously aligning ourselves with the right behaviors and behavioral modification tools that are ultimately not going to reinforce this loop, that can break us out of this loop and get us to start to see the issue from a much clearer perspective when our body isn't shooting off this fight or flight system. So that just is the one common, you know, pitfall I want to talk about in this episode. And then as we move in this series here, I'm going to talk about 3 more, you know, that I really see people get caught in. So thank you so much for taking the time to hang out today. My name is Matt Cotty, and we have additional resources for you if this is something you struggle with over at restoredminds.com. And I also have some links down in the notes below that will direct you to some downloads as well as some additional free trainings that you can access. Again, over at restoredminds.com. And if you found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing, and even sharing this with someone, you know, or on your social platforms, just to help get this information and resources out to people. So thank you so much for hanging out today, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Hey there, Matt here, and thank you for watching that video. And if you're struggling with stress and anxiety, I just want to let you know that I have a free 7-minute meditation that I'd like to give to you. You can just click the link right down in the notes to get instant access, and we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing to our channel. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you soon.